As always, please chuck your questions in the Q&A and Ainsley will be feeding them through or answering them as they go through. So today's discussion will all be on intersections. So we've covered off-road shared paths, we've covered on-road mid-block facilities, but intersections is the focus of today's topic, and it's really seen as probably the highest risk area for cyclists because you've got that direct conflict with motor vehicles. So what we'll be talking about today is what can we do to improve the safety for cyclists at intersections? What kind of treatments are there? And yeah, we'll talk about both in a retrofit situation, what we can do with our existing network, and also in our greenfield or brand new sites. Our good friend Wally is back in season, so you will be seeing this fellow pop up in our slides. Yeah, just a reminder that you will be asked a question as part of the quiz, which will be how many Wallies did you count? And this one does not count. So you're currently at 0, but make sure you keep an eye out because he is hiding in today's slides. And I'll be honest, he's a bit trickier to spot in this module. So best of luck. We may not have ran into this in the previous module, but just wanted to include this to close off some previous discussion. One of the things that regularly comes up is how do we treat on-road bicycle facilities with buses or bus stops? So this is an example of what is called a floating bus stop, whereby cyclists are actually, they travel kind of behind where the bus shelter is. So that means that any pedestrians that are either hopping off the bus or getting onto the bus don't need to interact with cyclists riding through. And it also means a cyclist doesn't have to kind of wait behind buses or merge into live traffic to be able to continue their journey. There's just this separate facility. So if you are working within that space, that's a really good solution. Sometimes you may not have the actual carriageway or road reserve width to be able to facilitate that. So another way that could be provided is actually including the bus drop-off area within the bicycle lane. But in this example, what is actually occurring is I'll just zoom it in so you can see it a bit clearer. There's like a ramped platform, so cyclists are slowing down where this conflict point is with pedestrians, making it much more likely that they're going to give way to pedestrians as they're getting on and off the bus. So another solution where you may not have that space. So just have those brief notes there if you are looking at any cyclist bus interactions. Another one that we just wanted to include that we didn't get time for in the previous module was this idea of a bicycle boulevard or an advisory bicycle lane. There's a few different terms for this treatment. And the basic premise is you'd be using this within local residential streets. There's no throughput of traffic. It's only, very small residential streets. And the way that it works is you'd have a bicycle lane in both directions at all times. So that would be painted, line marked. And then you'd have a shared traffic lane. So just one shared traffic lane that permits travel in both directions. This is kind of what it may look like. This is just an example over in Canada. The traffic volumes here are about 1,000 vehicles per day. So as I said, this is really where you want to be implementing them on very low volume roads. And the idea is that as vehicles, see an oncoming vehicle, they would be forced to yield to any cyclists within the bicycle lane and then give way to oncoming vehicles before passing one another. So we actually implemented one of these in Melbourne. It's on Napier Street, for anyone interested, in Fitzroy. And as part of the communications around that treatment, they did develop a video just to help residents and anyone traveling through that area about how this infrastructure works. So these next few slides will just show, I suppose, that video and how it works. So you can see we've got a cyclist that's traveling in both directions within the bicycle lane, and we've got the vehicle there at the bottom. And then forward in time, the vehicle spots another oncoming vehicle. They're both required to slow down and yield to any cyclists that may be in the bicycle lane. And then when it's safe to do so, pass one another. So really just wanted to include this so you've got a bit of an idea in case this topic ever comes up or you are looking at any local streets bicycle treatments. This is perhaps something that could be implemented. And Western Australia in particular, they do some pretty exciting things within this space. So shout out to WA. There were two examples that we showed for the 360-degree video as part of module 2. Example 1 was the protected or separated bicycle facility. And example 2 was riding adjacent the dooring zone. I'd love to hear your experience of how you found riding in both of those scenarios, and any tips or takeaways would be fantastic. But as I mentioned, today we are going to focus on intersections. A lot of the material that we reference is out of this document here, which is from NACTO. They're a US North American association, transport association, and very appropriately named document, Don't Give Up at the Intersection, because for a long time, for decades, we've had mid-blocks facilities, and then at the intersection, there's been nothing for cyclists. In fact, there has been comments within Austroads guides to say that, where it's not safe to do so, don't do anything, which is obviously not how cyclists ride. They don't just ride within a mid-block and then disappear. So it is really good to think about, well, how are we going to improve safety for our cyclists at intersections? And this resource in particular is just wonderful. It's absolutely spot on. It's really graphic as well, which I like. There's lots of figures and things like that. I was just reading this morning, so I use this all the time. There are Australian guidelines as well, but they largely repeat all of the information that's in here. So you're welcome to use, there's a TMR document called the Design and Selection of Cycle Tracks, which is excellent. But I just find that this one is more encompassing. So good little takeaway. Anyway, what we'll talk about today is protected intersections. If you've never heard that term before, that's completely okay. We'll talk about what that involves. We'll talk about the design configurations of a protected intersection. We will look at some international examples as well as Melbourne's protected intersection. So you'll get to see how different jurisdictions are currently implementing them. After that, we'll have a break and then we'll get stuck into signalized intersections. So this is probably more our retrofitting or our existing network. We'll talk about things like head starts, left turn and through treatments, hook turns, as well as bicycle signals. And I'll just check in with Ainsley and Co and see if there's any questions to get me started.
No questions from my end, Max, and I don't believe from Ainsley at the moment either. So I think we're good.
Awesome. We'll get stuck straight into it then. So this is an artistic rendition of a protected intersection, of Melbourne's protected intersection, actually. And I suppose what I want you to take away from this slide is at each corner or quadrant of the intersection, there are these little build-outs, curb extensions, generally referred to as a corner island or corner refuge islands. They are supplied at each corner of the intersection. And they're really pivotal in this protected intersection design, because what they do is they've got a tighter radius on them So vehicles, as they're performing left turns, are more likely to really slow down. Okay, so they're not going to take a nice sweeping left turn, pick up speed, and cross over both the cyclist and pedestrian crossing areas at speeds. Okay, so they're designed to slow down vehicles. The other thing that they do is they provide an offset from where the bicycle lane or crossing point is to where the left turn lane starts. So just to put that into perspective, if I just draw this is my traffic lane, and this is a left turn traffic lane. That's where the bicycle lane is, as you can see. This distance here, I've referred to as the offset. And that is able to be created through the use of that corner refuge island. So by implementing the corner refuge island, you've ensured that you've got this greater offset, which I'll explain why you would be promoting that. Ainsley.
Yes, Max, sorry, just a quick one. We've just had a couple of questions come through about the AADT or traffic volumes for this intersection. Is that information that we have or we know roughly?
Well, it's testing my knowledge. If anyone in the chat knows the AADT of Albert Street, Lansdowne Road in East Melbourne, that would be great. Otherwise, I would say 6,000 vehicles per day, around there. But I'm happy to follow that up offline as well.
Thank you.
No worries. All right, so the reason that we are looking to provide that offset, so left-hand side of the screen here, we have got a conventional intersection. And what that means is basically your cyclist or bicycle lane is adjacent or very, very close to where the left turn traffic lane is, right? What this then in turn means is as a vehicle is turning left, they have incredibly restricted views of cyclists that may be heading through. So in this image, this red pie-shaped thing, that represents the driver's sightlines or where they're focused. And you can see in this diagram that the cyclist is within that motorist's peripheral or within their blind spot. So it's very, very difficult for the motorist to be able to actually see the cyclist as they're crossing. A protected intersection deliberately increases this offset from where the left turn traffic lane is to where the bicycle lane is, where that crossing point is. And in turn, what they have created is an improved ability for that driver to be able to spot a cyclist that's crossing, because they're no longer in their passenger side, back door area. They are more or less crossing within their front windscreen. So it's a lot easier for motorists to actually see cyclists. And that's achieved through the use of that corner refuge islands, which is providing that offset. So as I mentioned, the selection and design of cycle tracks, the TMR document, they've also got some wonderful diagrams that just demonstrate the differences here. The left-hand side is our conventional intersection once again, where a cyclist may be traveling in that direction and a left-turn motorist crosses over there. You can see that that angle is fairly acute. So it's certainly not perpendicular. It's very, very tight. And we find generally, and this isn't just bicycles and traffic conflicts, this is any conflict points, the more acute that you make the angle, the harder it is to be able to achieve good sight lines. So we really encourage as far as possible to try and make those conflict points as close to perpendicular as possible. And that is what is the premise of a protected intersection. So a protected intersection cyclist travels along this way, and a left turn vehicle crosses over. And as they're crossing, it's much closer to perpendicular. A few more examples of the conventional versus the protected. I wouldn't necessarily say that this left-hand side is conventional, because typically you would have no separation whatsoever between a cyclist and general traffic. It would just be a painted line. But I think that image shows quite well, if you put yourself in the perspective of a vehicle, if you were the driver there and you wanted to turn left here, very, very challenging for you to be able to see any cyclists that might be behind you. So you've created this awkward scenario where you cannot actually see the cyclists that could be crossing over in front of you there. Protected intersection aims to really alleviate that as a risk. I'll check in with Ainsley before I go into the design features and see if we've had any comments so far on.
Yep, thanks, Max. So one question was just if you are aware of any smaller intersection versions where the protected intersection has been implemented, is one that came through on the chat, because this one does seem to be a larger intersection with multiple lanes.
Yeah, so typically when we refer to, first of all, let's give a prize out there. It's a very good question. So the protected intersections that we are looking at, I suppose, are more your cross intersection, multiple lanes, just because they're a little bit more complex. And if you understand that as a concept, then going to your T intersections or local streets and things like that will be a little bit easier. But when you are thinking about those lower order roads, local streets and things like that, you may be using what's referred to as a bent out treatment for a cyclist crossing. And that has the same design principles as what we're showing here. So by all means, the protected intersection can be applied in different road classifications. So it's not just for arterials. Yeah, it just may be using different terminology. So the bent out treatment is what you may have seen for crossing over a local street, for instance.
Perfect. Thanks, Max. And the other one that's come up a couple of times is just about sightlines for buses, particularly how like the left turn would work going around the island of the protected intersection, if you had any thoughts on that.
Great question. So we do have some slides coming up that deals with buses and heavy vehicles in a bit more detail. So I'll just park that one for the moment. Excuse the pun.
Perfect. I think that's all for now. Thanks, Max.
Thank you, Ainsley. So we'll have a look at some design features of our protected intersections. This one is from the MassDOT Separated Bike Lane Planning and Design Guide. It's obviously from a US resource. So we have flipped these images and we would use different terminology. So don't get too hung up on all the terms that are used. I'll translate it to kind of the Australian lingo as I go through. As I mentioned, number one is our corner refuge islands. It's really the most critical feature because it slows down vehicles. It's got a tighter radius and it provides that offset that I talked about. Number two is an area where cyclists can queue or pause. So just like, you know, motorists need to stop at the red light, you've got a designated area here for cyclists where they stop at the red light as well. And you may need to make adjustments on how much queuing length and space to provide, depending on how much capacity you expect cyclists at that location. Number three is an area where motorists can yield or give way. Preferably, you'd have enough space there that, you know, that vehicle could safely wait to turn left into the other leg without blocking, if that was a through and left, without blocking the through behind them. But you're very much constrained by what is typically provided. Number four is a separate location for pedestrians to cross. So we don't really like to see our protected intersections forming a bit of a shared crossing, because up to this point, it's likely that cyclists have been in a separated facility. So they've likely had bicycle only up until this intersection. If you were to try and force them to share the crossing with pedestrians at these locations, it's incredibly likely that they'll be riding at speed. And they may have to weave in and out of pedestrians, which, as I've said before, is just a very uncomfortable thing for both pedestrians and cyclists. So we like to see that our pedestrian crossing and our cyclist crossing is kept as two separate facilities there. Number 5, this one's a really good one. And this is the pedestrian crossing over the bike lane. So if I was a cyclist coming from the right of screen and I see there's some zebra line marking, I know that that's an area where I need to yield to pedestrians and I need to slow down. If we didn't have that facility and it's just a free-for-all for cyclists to cross through here, you can create this really awkward points where pedestrians may not understand that, you know, they have to either give way to cyclists, or they're a bit of a confusion as to who gives way to who. I really like the idea of actually all of those legs having these zebra crossings to then indicate that pedestrians have priority as they're crossing over that entire crosswalk. Marissa.
Max, we've just got a comment or a question. What about the pole in the middle of the island? Wouldn't that block driver view of the bike rider until the last moment?
Let's give a prize there and let's get rid of that pole. That's a terrible, terrible idea. Let's not put that there at all, because that would get hit all the time as well. So very good pickup.
Great. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Leanne.
And finally, number 6, pedestrian curb ramp. Just, you know, ensuring that we've got a way for our pedestrians to be able to safely access the adjacent footpath. As always, I just much prefer to actually speak into real examples. So I'm going to just get stuck into this image of before a protected intersection has been installed. This is a signalized intersection in the Netherlands. I have flipped this over, mirrored this. And the leg that I'm going to focus on is the northern leg, or the top leg. And I'm going to show the path that a cyclist may be taking if they just wanted to ride straight through here. So you can kind of see just adjacent that arrow where that ... is, that's the bicycle lane. So it's curbside. So a cyclist may be riding like this through the intersection. They may come off road there. But anyway, they would take that general movement. I'll use a different color and I'll show you the movement of a left turning vehicle at that same location. So remember, they've both got the green to go. So there is a confusion. Who would give way to who? That's the left turn vehicle movement, roughly. As I talked about before, you can clearly see that that crossing angle is incredibly acute. So it's very, very tight angle. If you put yourself in the motorist's position of turning left at that location, very, very difficult to be able to see cyclists. And that's what a protected intersection is aimed at improving. It's really trying to maximize your sight lines between your cyclists and your left turn vehicles as they approach the conflict point. So this is how things look now after the protected intersection has been installed. And I'll just do that same demonstration of both a cyclist and a vehicle using this space. So cyclists wanted to go through, they get positioned into a kind of off-road type of facility. They may need to pause at this location where you can see the hold line is, wait for their green light, and then cross over before continuing through. Whereas the vehicle that is turning left, they may be doing something like this. And you can see that that angle where the conflict point is much, much closer to perpendicular. So let's have a look what this one looks like out on the ground. And I will give, let's say 30 seconds for everyone to tell me what is something a little bit peculiar about this specific site, or something that doesn't quite look right, or something that we wouldn't perhaps do within our jurisdiction. So pop your answers in the chat. I'm interested to see if you've got any ideas of what might be a bit strange. And I'll check in with Ainsley to see if I've missed any questions, or Marissa.
One quickly for you, Max, while we're waiting. There's a question to say, is there a legal requirement for drivers to give way to cyclists approaching from behind?
Yeah, okay. So there is a road rule that says if a vehicle's left indicator is on, then a cyclist must give way to the left turning vehicle. The issue with that is you regularly run into problems where if they're both adjacent each other, a cyclist may not be able to see that an indicator has gone on, or a vehicle may not put the indicator on. So you've got these, hairy situations. But yes, if you're solely looking at the road rule, there is, I suppose, a law to help designate who has the actual priority there.
Perfect. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ainsley. All right, let's have a look. So I can see there's, lots of mentions about none of the painting and no curbs. That's the one that I was interested in. So this area in particular, that corner refuge island, we would definitely be recommending that is actually curved, or there's some physical vertical difference there, because what would likely occur is, this is right turn, so a vehicle may actually sweep right across that facility, which means they can do it at higher speeds. And also, if you had lots of cyclists waiting in this space here, it just increases the risks of them getting struck. So very odd to see that hasn't been implemented here, but and you can also see that the other kind of median has some degree of curving. So I'm not sure. It could be a drainage reason, or it could just be because in the Netherlands, you're kind of expected to see cyclists at every intersection. So it's not as high of a risk to have vehicles cutting the corner, so to speak. But certainly within our jurisdictions, would be recommending to have some form of, curb there to actually slow down vehicles and make sure they're not cutting over that space. Another example here, this one is in Maryland in the USA. Very, very similar design. We can see at each of the corners here, we've got those corner refuge islands. And if we just have a quick read of the legend in the bottom left, we can see that there is proposed concrete or stamped concrete, and then there's a proposed brick. So you can see that there's two different materials being offered as part of this design. And another question that I've got for the group is, why do you think the design may have created these two different material choices at the corner refuge islands? Another interesting thing, while those answers come in about this particular design, is the northern crossing point is bi-directional. So you've actually got cyclists crossing both directions in that way. All the other ones are one directional. So just an interesting thing that you can be doing protected intersection at bi-directional facilities. I see lots of wonderful answers coming through again. I do agree with the visual contrast, certainly to help make that more obvious. So we'll give a prize out there, Marissa. The other one that I've seen it mentioned a few times now, I'll let you pick the winner there, Marissa, is to cater for heavy vehicles. So as we know, when heavy vehicles are turning left or performing any turning movements, they do require additional space. So this is what it looks like out on the ground. That red section is where the brick is, and that stamped concrete solution is at just carriageway or roadway level. So the idea is that heavy vehicles, as they're turning in this continent, turning right, what we would say turning left, they would actually track over that concrete section, which is what we would call a mountable apron. And that curb is there to ensure that they don't go any further than that. However, general passenger vehicles would be encouraged just to take the edge of that mountable apron. So we do very, very similar things here at roundabouts and things like that, where heavy vehicles, they may be given a mountable apron or just a concrete apron where they are able to track over that just to perform their turning movements. And that's generally applied at protected intersections as well. Okay, another example here. This one is over in the UK now. So we're getting our travel miles up. This one's another interesting example where we've got these giant bicycle boxes that are being utilized. Now, you may recall that I've been saying that we're trying to get cyclists kind of away from the left turn lane to ensure that we've got this offsets. However, what this specific design is acknowledging is that, well, if a cyclist wants to turn right, this is what they may be forced to do. So they may be riding along here and then they get a red light here. They have to stop, have to wait for their green phase. Once they get the green, they can continue. And then they have to stop here again to wait for their green again. And then they go again and perform their right turn. Theoretically, that's all absolutely achievable and no issues, but without considering, the human factor, which is lots of cyclists just will not do that. And they won't want to ride any more than they have to, or they'll take the route that is easiest for them. So this particular design has kind of acknowledged that and said that, well, if you do just want to turn right, then you can actually park yourself in this gigantic bike box. When you get the green, you can move into this middle of the intersection into the right turn lane, just like you're a vehicle. And once you've got a gap in the traffic, perform your right turn movement. So you're no longer waiting to get through multiple phases. You are putting that, decision making into your own hands. Now, from a purely safety perspective, of course, it'd be wonderful to see all cyclists use the safest option available, but that's not really considering how cyclists would actually interact with this environment. So I'm actually all for this design of kind of catering for a much broader range of experience, not just those cyclists that are completely novice, or not just those cyclists that are completely, confident in any kind of scenario. It's giving the opportunity for both there. So I really like this as an example. This is, the Manchester Cycle Optimised Protected Signals Junction, which is abbreviated to Cyclops. So if you want to do any further reading, just type in Manchester Cyclops, and I hope it will take you to that junction and not to anything else a bit strange. But really cool example. So this is what it looks like out on the ground, and another photo there of some happy cyclists. Another little bit quirky thing that they've done in this particular example is they've actually flipped where the cyclists and pedestrians cross. So pedestrians go over here, cross, and then back over there. So they cross over the cycle lane here. The previous examples and what is more common is you'd have the pedestrians cross there and cyclists cross there. But this is the approach that they've gone for. Where they have got pedestrians crossing over the bicycle lane, they have nominated to install this yellow pavement color, as you can see. Once again, I'd be recommending to actually implement the zebra there, because I think that's a lot more readily understood. Perhaps in Manchester, that yellow is a lot easier or more widespread, and that's the reason for it. But that's what I'm talking about when I say we should putting the zebra crossing across the bicycle lane, just to make it clear that pedestrians have right of way at these locations. All right, before I hop into Melbourne's protected intersection, I'll pause again and check for any questions.
Hi, Max. Yeah, we've got some questions in the chat. Does it create issues for cyclists wanting to go straight through the intersection and bypassing the protected intersection?
So cyclists, as you suggest, they may go through this, and you can kind of see that there are bicycle symbols to kind of support that, and then they may continue in through there. To an extent, yes. I mean, in a perfect world, you'd have 100% compliance in the safest outcome, but I don't think it's to such a degree that you'd be significantly concerned. You can also see that it's a little bit difficult, but see how they've got that give way line marking there? So if there was a cyclist doing that movement and a cyclist doing that movement at the same time, that's trying to say that if you were in this cyclist, that one, you would need to be yielding to the other cyclist. So that does really add a conflict point and can create confusion, but generally you're not going to have, you know, hundreds of cyclists at the same time doing that. So it's a relatively minimal risk, but it is a risk. Yeah. Good question. Let's give a prize out there, Marissa.
Okay. And has Austroads reviewed bicycle boxes?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. And there's a bit more information in today's session around bike boxes.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have another lane for e-scooters?
So from everything that I've seen is no, we generally don't keep a separate lane. They tend to use the bicycle lane. I think that they've got similar speeds and similar kind of dimensions, so it makes sense to put them in with the bike lane as opposed to the traffic lane or the footpath. I don't think we're ever going to be in a scenario where we've just got unlimited land available that we can just have separate, you know, facilities for every different type of road user, nor do I think we want to create that, because I prefer the idea of trying to share the space than trying to create, you know, absolutely every single facility for every single user. So I tend to agree that e-scooters would fit within the bike lane there.
Okay. Are left-hand turn cars expected to give way to the cyclists?
Yes, that's correct. So think of it as like, if a pedestrian was crossing there and a vehicle was turning left there, they'd be forced to give way to pedestrians. It's that exact same philosophy. It's just the cyclists are going there as well. So left-turning vehicles have to yield. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's about it. There's just a comment about the red zones. Is that for pedestrians? Someone has.
Yes, the red is for pedestrians there. So it looks a little bit odd to us, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No other questions.
Okay. We'll have a look at Melbourne's protected intersection then. And this is the scenario prior to any intervention. The just, I mean, it's all the same on the whichever quadrant you look at. So I'm just going to focus on one, which will be the bottom right. And if we look at just adjacent this park here, there is a curbside protected bicycle lane. It's somewhat protected. You don't need to know the actual details of that protection, but that's the idea. So you can see that that's the bicycle lane there, and then the parking lane is adjacent that. And as a cyclist is riding along, they get to the end of the parking lane, and then from there to the hold line of the intersection, there's nothing. So there's no bicycle facilities whatsoever. There is this tiny little bicycle box right at the start, but coming up to that intersection, nothing. So this is how things looked prior to any intervention. And just to talk through the stand-up lanes, so for those not familiar with that term, that just refers to what the lanes look like at the intersection approach. We've got a dedicated left lane. We've got a through, and then this one is a through and a right. My arrows look a bit funny today. But 3 stand-up lanes there. So that was what would occur prior to any intervention. I'll do a 50-50 now, so you can see before and after. And we'll take you through that cyclist again, their journey. So again, they've got this protected facility, and that protection is now all the way up to the intersection. So it no longer just drops off and disappears. That protection is provided all the way to the intersection itself. You can kind of see the little separators there. So that's awarded all the way through there. A cyclist then has opportunity to wait, stop at the hold line there, wait for their green to go, and then they can continue through that intersection there. Now, what you may have noticed about this intersection is my stand-up lanes have changed. So now I've only got 2. So this is a left and a through, and this is a through and a right. So previously I had 3, now I've only got the 2. Does this create congestion issues? Quite possibly. It may increase, vehicle congestion. You may have a worse level of service for vehicles, but the reason for this project was solely for the improvement of safety for cyclists. So that was the kind of key objective or the KPI for this project. So it was agreed that that could come at the cost of always ensuring that the level of service is prioritized for vehicles. So I think that's a really positive outcome. And yeah, this is just to give you a bit of, context regarding this particular site. It's kind of an inner city location. It's fairly busy, but there are arterials close by, which are much, more significant traffic. So kind of getting some of those vehicles off this because they've lost a lane essentially, and pushing them onto the arterial, which I think is a great idea. And I shouldn't actually say it's not necessarily a loss of a lane. Well, I guess it depends on how you word it, but because leading up to this intersection, there was just 2 lanes. It's only coming to the intersection that they just awarded another lane for the left turn movements. So you've kind of, another way to look at this is you've kind of just extended what would have been the parking lane. So that space there, instead of having that parking lane width or buffer there, you just extended your bicycle facility. So you've got separated facilities all the way to the intersection, which is very exciting. Now, because this was a new treatment within Melbourne, there was a lot of, stakeholder involvement, a lot of discussions, a lot of road safety audits completed on functional designs like this to determine what would be the best outcome. And in particular, one of the sticking points was the corner refuge island. And this went through quite a number of iterations to come to the end result. So I'll just have a little story time about how that has progressed. On the left-hand side here was just kind of like a little jelly bean. So this was just like, yeah, we'll just do some curved little islands to help protect cyclists and create that offset. But, you know, there was a bit of concern that that's going to be quite small and perhaps vehicles won't even notice that and just drive over the top of it. So went to version number 2 and made that corner refuge island quite bigger there. And then they were like, okay, yeah, this is a bit more legible for drivers, so that should be easier to see. But if you have a look at just the way that this has been designed, you know, it's not really one smooth curve or anything like that. The radius seem a little bit odd, so vehicles might have issues actually turning here. So that's how we got to iteration number 3, which is like the kidney bean shape. This one was super positive, but there was a bit of discussion around, well, do I have enough space for cyclists behind the corner refuge island to be able to stop and wait for their red light? We know this is a cycling corridor and there's going to be lots of commuter cyclists, so there's going to be a build up, and we want to make sure that we've got sufficient storage space for them. So I just shaved off a bit of that kidney bean to create this boomerang shape. And then finally that went through our swept path analysis and did all the turning movements for your design vehicles through that space, which is just your, I think it was a garbage truck in this instance. And then that required just some mountable apron either side, just to ensure that there is a opportunity for those left turning heavy vehicles to safely move around those without always having to mount the curb. Marissa?
Max, what is the total road width required for this type of intersection?
So in this instance here, what was eaten up was one of those traffic lanes. So you could say that 3.5 meter width would be required to provide that facility. But, you know, you could, in like T intersections or things like that, you could stagger it in that bent out intersection that I spoke about before, where you just kind of take a bit of the land adjacent each of the quadrants there to be able to get your cyclists crossing across there. So there's not like one clear dimension. It's more trying to work out what is up for, you know, up for possible use, and trying to just define where your edge of the road reserve is and then work in from there. But yeah, if you're able to take up a traffic lane, that would be more than sufficient.
No, thank you. That's all.
No worries. And as I mentioned, because this was a new treatment within Melbourne, there was quite a bit of skepticism, although we know we have seen these things across the world for many, many years now. Obviously, if you're doing it in your own backyard, it can get quite nerve-wracking. So there was an idea that, well, let's get all the stakeholders into an off-road protected environment, away from traffic, and let's see if we can just give them a demonstration of what this will look like. And so they decided to utilize a depot, which is completely private land, so no, you know, visitors or outsiders, public or anything like that. They got all the stakeholders on bicycles, as well as, you know, acting as a pedestrian and things like that. And they line marked a 1-to-1 scale of this protected intersection before it was built, just so all the stakeholders could actually experience what it felt like riding through this type of facility. They also had this little test vehicle that was, you know, driving around just so you could get the experience from the motorist perspective as well. But really, really good idea, stakeholder engagement activity was, well, we'll actually do a real demonstration of what this will feel like once it's been built. And it was overwhelmingly positive, or nothing to suggest that it couldn't go ahead, and it was eventually built. So this one did get the green light. And you can see in this kind of snapshot aerial here, pretty good definition of why we're providing this is, as that left turn vehicle is going across, they've got a much better opportunity to sight the pedestrian that's crossing. So they're likely already prepared to stop. And then as that cyclist comes across as well, much easier to spot them as well. So really good example of this. Just the other thing with regards to swept path designs is, if you've got heavy vehicles, buses, or anything longer than that, you would definitely be doing swept path design checks to ensure that your corner refuge island is the correct dimensions to be able to support that movement. It's also important to consider your hold line, because potentially a heavy vehicle may swing to the oncoming traffic, and you may need to shift your hold line back to be able to facilitate that. I might open up a poll now, Marissa, if that's okay, because great. Got a question for the group, which is, the most important feature of a protected intersection is, and you've got 4 options: maximizing sight lines between motor vehicles and cyclists, conflict paint, banning general traffic movements, or separate phasing for traffic and bicycle traffic. And I'm now going to take a 4-minute break, so you can finish this off and then have yourself a break, have a stretch, get a coffee, and we'll be back in 4 minutes. Welcome back. We might just end that poll there and we can share with everyone. So the most important feature of a protected intersection is maximizing the sight lines between motor vehicles and cyclists, specifically left turn vehicles. So great to see that we've had an overwhelming majority suggest that. I will have a few more slides just on the protected intersections, and then we can move on to the next part of the module. But just wanted to really reiterate the reason that we are doing this. So this is at Melbourne's protected intersection, and we can see that we've got a taxi that is about to turn left, and myself on a bike here in the bicycle facility, heading straight through. And this arrow that is shown in this very light yellow is the traditional path that a cyclist would take heading through this intersection. This very light green arrow is left turn movement for the taxi driver. I'm going to step now forward a moment in time to show you how things look from the perspective of the cyclist, and show those arrows once again. So that would be the position of the cyclist. That is the left turn vehicle. And that is in the purple there, very light lavender, would be the position of the cyclist using the protected facility. So if you were riding in this facility and there was no protection, you'd be at this point here and being like, I need to either slam on the brakes to ensure that the taxi driver and I don't have a conflict, or assume that the taxi driver is going to give way and head straight through. Very uncomfortable to be in. Moment in time again, and it looks something like this, where we will have the yellow movement, which would be where things would have been in a conventional intersection, the left turn of that motorist, and you can quite clearly see how that offset has been provided. And if you also look within the passenger window of the taxi, you can see that the driver's body is actually facing towards me as the cyclist as I'm crossing over. So this is a real testament of why we were advocating for this type of design, because we're really maximizing those sight lines at the conflict point. It's really important to consider our sight lines, not just at the conflict point, but leading up to it, so that both the cyclists and the vehicles are able to see each other. Actually, I've got another diagram that shows this a little bit better. But basically, you want to ensure that there's no, you've got a clear area where there's no standing and a clear zone, so there's no parked vehicles. But even things like signal infrastructure, plants, utility poles, all those types of things, if you've got lots of them, that can create visual obstructions. So if you're able to provide, just a clear sight line as possible, that's generally favored there. All right. We've got another opportunity to chime in with your comments, and it is that time of day where we ask, what's wrong with this photo? And I'll get rid of this confused cyclist there, and I might even move the banner down for you so you can have a good look at this. And pop down in the chat anything that you see wrong with this photo. I'll give you 30 seconds. Surfacing, potholes, pit lids. Great, very good. Bike marking the wrong way around. Yep, this is in Canada, so they do drive on the right and right on the right there. Angle of the conflict point, drain in the path. It is confusing. Where did the cyclists go? Marking wrong. Cyclists are confused. Lots of conflicts. Bikes would need their own phase to make this work. Yes, very good. Great, lots of awesome suggestions there. Yeah, I'll give a prize out to who mentioned the grates. I'm generally more concerned when those grates are what's referred to as longitudinal, or whether in that direction, because then you can get then you can get bicycle tires stuck in them. Less of a risk there, but they may create slipping issues. Also give a prize out to the planter boxes. I think they just seems a little bit of a peculiar choice in this instance, and I think they would be very difficult to maintain. But I also give a prize out to the person that mentioned this diagonal crossing and cyclists requiring their own phase to cross there. Actually super uncommon to do that. More commonly, what you would have is you'd have a cyclist that has to cross over there and then cross over there. So kind of two movements. I actually think you can, I think the diagonal crossing, if that's where you're trying to bring cyclists to, like that's where their destination is, then it makes a lot of sense to make that, as easy as possible for them. But you'd really want to make sure that you're not having a high risk of things like red light running, or vehicles that are just unaware of what's occurring at this intersection. So you could look at things like raising the intersection or providing raised tables for where vehicles approach this, just to make them more cognizant that this intersection is a bit different to all the other ones. But anyway, just thought it was a peculiar example. Thank you for sharing your insights as well. I think we also got lots of good feedback that it's also a bit strange for you too. All right, so head start boxes. I think this was spoken about before. Austroads, cycling aspects, section 5.3.5 talks about them in more detail. They've given these 4 general arrangements that are commonly used. And then they provide descriptions of when you would actually implement these. With head start boxes, the main kind of takeaway is, it's really, really positive to get a cyclist right at the front of an intersection so that they are most visible. They're not having to wait behind a car and, inhale all those fumes, and they could potentially be hidden and things like that. Really good idea. We provide these kind of as a standard within Victoria, but a lot of other jurisdictions are not quite as ruthless in implementing these, but I think they're a really good idea. What I think you can take about them is they do also offer wayfinding. So it's not just the visibility of them. It is wayfinding for cyclists. So just as an example, if we look at this example A configuration, where we've just got a 2-meter head start box for cyclists. Cyclists may be propped at this location waiting for their green. What that indicates to cyclists is they may be able to go straight or turn left, but the bike box or the head start does not extend over to this right lane. So they are not necessarily being told that, there's any kind of cycling infrastructure over there to the right. So, we're not really providing for that turning movement. If we compare that to example D, where you can see the head start box is covering all of those traffic lanes, then that would provide that cue to cyclists that you can turn left, you can go straight, you can turn right. All of those movements are kind of being recommended for cyclists, and it's also probably a cyclist attraction to take that movement. So just a heads up there that they do provide that wayfinding. Now, I should also mention that this example C is super, super rare and not one that I would really recommend. Very, very uncommon to have just like these little narrow bicycle lanes. And yeah, between the through and the right in this instance. So this would be cyclists aren't being told to go left, but they are going through, and they also may be traveling right. I think a better way to kind of advocate for this one would be a big box like this. So a cyclist could go through and then get across into the right turn lane like that, as opposed to trying to cut across and get into that there. Anyway, there is some wording on when exactly you may use that specific out of the cycling aspects of the Austroads Guide. Now, if we are unable to do our protected intersections, we will talk about, what other supporting type of treatments we can offer. So for our left turn and through treatments, so that's a vehicle that's turning left, and the cyclist that's heading through. We've got these 2 configurations that are relatively common. So you could have a cyclist facility, and as they are approaching the left turn lane, it does end, but there is the provision of this sharrow that we've talked about before. And that indicates to general traffic that this is a shared area now and cyclists can claim the lane. And then a cyclist could actually travel through there because what is indicated by that sign. It's left only for vehicles, but a cyclist is accepted, so they're able to travel through. So that's quite a common approach. Another way to do it is kind of bending the cycle lane out and across the left turn lane like this. And as vehicles are turning in here to get to their left turn lane, you know, you've got that use of the conflict paint there just to make it as clear as possible that there is cyclists in there. But yeah, it's not an ideal scenario. You know, if you've got the protected intersections, that's what we'd be going for instead. I'll show you a real life example of this. You know, I love to share my anecdotes. So this was me before I moved to where I currently lived, where I used to live, and I used to ride to work. I used to take this road. I'll focus on my journey to work, which is right to left. And my bicycle lane was just there, which is adjacent the parking lane, adjacent the live traffic lane. So within the dooring zone, which is, you know, not a great facility, but I am relatively experienced and not going to stop me from getting on the bike. So that was how things started. End of the parking lane, and you can see it does drop off, but they have provided those sharrows within the left turn lane. So I would use the left turn lane to continue through, and then I'd get back on the other side and I'd have that type of movement. That was my journey to work. So not great, but not the worst scenario in the world. On my way home from work, very, very similar arrangements, riding in the bicycle lane adjacent the dooring zone. And once the parking lane ends about there, there's just this whole section where there's no cycling facilities whatsoever. So the bike lane just ends and then there's nothing. So that's a really, really common example of designers just being like, we can't fit a bike lane in here, so we're not going to do anything, which is not a great outcome at all. And yeah, as I was cycling through here, you kind of just have to push yourself into this through lane because you don't really want to get into the left lane and then hold up all that traffic to try and get through. So you go into the through lane and, you know, motorists aren't really expecting you to be there. And yeah, really interesting example where this one intersection actually has two different treatments. So perfect world would have much better consistency across our corridors. So taking, you know, an A to B approach would have similar types of intersection treatments, but certainly at a minimum, we would be expecting to have constant treatments at the same intersection. So this is actually very unusual not to have, you know, the sharrow kind of approach done on both sides of this intersection. Now, if we're talking about left and through treatments, but the left is not just a left turn stand-up lane, it's more of a slip lane, then what you tend to have is actually a really, really long conflict point, because you'd have where the taper starts and, you know, all that merge area and things like that. And it's basically extended the area that a cyclist is exposed. Okay, so it's just created a much bigger area for that conflict to occur. In a perfect world, you know, we'd love to see cyclists that are moved to, you know, something that's off-road. Austroads does provide some guidance of what this could look like. So bringing a cyclist off-road and then crossing the slip lane at a perpendicular angle. Once again, always seeing that perpendicular before getting back onto their own road facility. You could also implement a raised crossing at this location and give priority to your cyclists crossing here. That's another consideration within this space. My only kind of caveat with suggesting that is, if we just look at this example, this one is 80 km/h speed, and as you can see, it's busy road. It's approaching a highway interchange and things like that. Lots of traffic on this road. Cyclists that are already riding here are likely incredibly confident and comfortable. It's not your school kids and things like that riding here currently. If this were a corridor where you did have, you know, a greater diversity in riders, then you would be trying to advocate for that little figure that I showed before. But if you were to be building that for instances like this, or even if you thought about, say, freeway interchanges and how you cater for cyclists there, well, generally the cyclists that are riding on freeways are already incredibly confident, and they're going to be taking the routes that's easiest for them. So if you were proposing that they come off road here and cross there and then get back on there, all those turning movements are just not at all attractive for them, and they just wouldn't do that. So I wish it was all simpler and we could just, you know, always do off-road and know that if we provide it, then that's exactly what will be used 100% of the time. But that's not really the way that it works. So you need to consider the demographic of the riders within that area. And yeah, where you do have your strategic cycling corridors, those are the ones that you are really advocating for, trying to promote cycling from ages 8 to 80. You are thinking of school children and all those types of things, and hopefully none of those are on environments that look like this. But those higher speed areas where we do still have infrastructure, yeah, I agree that some infrastructure is better than none. But yeah, the more that you try and push cyclists to use what could be the safest option, if it's that really confident user group, they may not necessarily take that up. Anyway, just a bit of food for thought there. Another thing that we do very, very commonly here in Victoria is this idea of a hook turn. And we do hook turns both in vehicles and on bicycles. And it's basically the idea that if you are turning right at an intersection, you don't need to worry about getting over into the right turn lane. You just get provided these little hook turn boxes, and you wait for your phase to go, and then you've got your first opportunity to enter that intersection. So it's a super, super common thing to occur in Victoria, and I think a really effective one as well. Here's just an example of one where you can see hook turn little boxes occurring at each location there. And just to clarify how that works, so a cyclist that was traveling from the bottom of the screen may choose to access that hook turn box there. They pause, they wait for their green, and then they just continue their journey like that. And what that means is they're no longer required to head across into this right turn lane and potentially conflict with that through traffic lane or the right turn lane adjacent to them. They don't have to worry about kind of pushing themselves in front of that. So that's the idea behind the hook lane. It's just, you know, save that stress of trying to get into the right turn lane. Here's a bit of space that you can prop in front of all of the traffic at the intersection and perform the right turn by going left. That's just an example of what it looks like on the ground there. If you are doing any right turns where you may have like a T intersection configuration, this is another way that you could potentially look to implement the design. So you could have this kind of bypass facility where a cyclist is able to have a little right turn facility of their own. You'd put a little pedestal here or a push button, so cyclists are able to activate their phase, and then they would be able to turn into that leg there. And once again, just to reiterate, the reason that we'd be going for that is because the alternative would be a cyclist that has to cross over those live traffic lanes to get into the right turn lane to be able to perform that movement, which is just a pretty dicey scenario. This is just an example of one that was installed in Adelaide. So yeah, cyclist doesn't have to go all the way across here to get into a right turn lane. They've got this ability to stop here, push the button, cross over, and then cross over again, actually, in this instance, before completing their right turn. So just a pretty good way to, help take the stress out of performing your right turns as cyclists is through the use of either those bypass facilities or the hook turns. This is obviously not an intersection. This is a mid-block, but kind of operates similar to what I was just talking about there, where I'll just show you what's going on. We've got a cyclist facility that's currently on the left-hand side, and then it's getting brought across the road and continues onto the other side. And the way that this is actually facilitated is a cyclist, comes up onto the adjacent shared path or footpath area there, and then they pause, have to pick a gap in traffic. They've got a median refuge there where they pause again and pick a gap in traffic before going across there. And the reason that you'd be doing that is if you didn't have this type of facility, you'd be getting cyclists that perform this type of movement, which would be a diagonal crossing, which without any signals or anything like that is a pretty dicey thing to be doing. So yeah, just sort of show another example of how that looks. I'll check in with Marissa and Ainsley to see if we've got any questions.
Thanks, Max. Lots of chat in the chat. Lots of comments in the chat. We've got a few questions. How conflict of pedestrians and cyclists can be solved. I mean, bypass cyclist lane at signal.
Yeah, so it's probably the best way to have that conflict is, it's actually shown in this image, is highlighting it with the use of the zebra crossing. So just prioritizing pedestrians as they cross over the bicycle lane. That's generally the best solution. You can also look at raising that, creating a wombat crossing. So pedestrians cross, at one level and cyclists are forced to go up a little bit of a speed hump. That can also be a really good way to ensure that cyclists are slowing down and giving way to pedestrians.
Yeah. Okay. And designs for a confident rider should be nominated en route or maybe a litigious risk.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Yep.
Comment. Yep. Question has just come in. Is that a shared path on LHS at a pedestrian refuge? No signage.
Yeah, I do believe this is a shared path, and this is a pedestrian refuge. Although I agree the signage is pretty confusing and lacking. This is just an example that Jamie sent over, actually. I think he was in Brisbane or Queensland somewhere and sent this through.
Okay. Thanks, Max. There's no other real questions here. I don't think Ainsley, I think Ainsley is keeping up with her questions. Yep, all good.
I'll keep on heading through them and talk about bicycle signals. So got another anecdote, story time. This is, as you can see, an incredibly large signalized intersection in Melbourne, and my home used to just be over here to the right-hand side. And I wanted to travel from this bottom leg. You can see, if you really squint your eyes, but maybe I'll just zoom it in. There is a bicycle lane and a bicycle head start box at this intersection, at the stand-up lane there. And this is the kind of quadrant that I'm going to be focusing on. And because my house was at the right, the movement I'm focusing on is that right turn there. So I'll show you what it looks like on the ground from that position. So it looks something like this. This photo is a little bit out of date because it was a bicycle box went across this. And it was colored in green. A little bit out of date, but generally that's what it looks like. Now you may have noticed adjacent the signal there's this little attachment. And that is just a bicycle lantern. So it's just a signal for cyclists. And the way that it's used in this particular intersection is it gives cyclists a head start. So they're able to enter this intersection and, before any other vehicles, and get that head start. So really, really love head starts for multiple reasons. One being that they just are a great feeling to be able to get the head start in front of all your vehicles. So it's just a good feeling. Number two is you've got an ability to be able to clear through cyclist queuing. So for instance, as you saw in the previous aerial, there's not a lot of space here for cyclists to queue. So if you've got a cyclist 3, 4, 5, 6, if you had a dozen cyclists, they would well and truly cover this slip lane. If you give cyclists the head start, it's much more likely that they'll be able to get through and unblock that slip lane, which will then open that up for general traffic. So it's got that positive there as well. But also it's just that, once again, that idea of visibility of cyclists. So putting them at the front, getting them through the intersection and getting them into a position of prime, viewpoint. So it's immediately understanding that there's cyclists within this area. Marissa.
Max, how long is the head start?
Good question. Typically between 3 to 5 seconds, but I've seen much longer. I wouldn't really go any shorter than 3 seconds though.
Okay. And would you pull back the hold line for vehicles by 300 millimeters to assist with the head start?
Absolutely. Yep. You could look to pull back the hold line there.
Yeah.
So you can
Perfect.
also create a bit more of the box there at the start.
So thanks.
Anyway, I'm just talking about the positivities of that bicycle signal and things like that. But another quirk, I suppose, associated with this is my own user experience, which that signal is actually saying this is giving cyclists the head start for through movements, not for right turns. And as I mentioned before, I wanted to perform the right turn. So going back to our aerial now, when the bicycle signal green is on, the actual movement that is being prioritized is this, which is the through cyclist movement. What occurred when I was turning right, though, is I didn't have any cue to suggest that that is what was occurring. And because I wanted to turn right, I actually got to about that point there when vehicle traffic got their green as well. So that was that 3 to 5 seconds where vehicles actually get the right. And as you can see at that location, in the middle of the light rail there and this huge intersection, pretty hairy scenario to be in. Not exactly where you want to be situated and trying to pick a gap in that traffic there. So it's an instance where the bicycle signals and lanterns are absolutely fantastic, but they do actually generally only support the movement of a specific turn. So it could be a left or a through or a right. And there might need to be some initial, supplementary consideration as to how your cycling community may interpret or misinterpret that. Anyway, just an example. I was completely fine there. I didn't have any near misses or anything, but just thought I would share my experience there. This is a photo out of WA where we've got the actual bicycle signals incorporated into the lanterns themselves, which I think is a really nice solution. And they're also dotted all the way along this corridor. So, you know, if you're a cyclist and you get the red, you can ride up to the head start box there, position yourself in front, you get the green to go, and then if you get another red, well, you get to do it all again and just keep putting yourself in front of traffic and keep getting that green. So it's really positive thing for cyclists just to be able to get that constant ability to go through this. Now, I'm not sure if Ken mentioned this in the previous module, the temporary traffic management of our cycling infrastructure. We tend to consider that as a bit of an afterthought, which is a bit of a shame because, you know, this example here, if we've got a bicycle lane and then temporarily we've just said bicycle lane is closed, merge right, is really not a great outcome for our cyclists. The other ironic thing is this photo was taken as part of Melbourne's protected intersection that is being constructed. And it's kind of like, you know, we're going to build this thing that's much safer for cyclists, but in the interim, you know, good luck. So if we are doing any construction works, it's a really good suggestion to look at what is currently being provided for cyclists and how we're going to maintain that. In these scenarios, it can often be looked at to provide a detour that's on footpath and creating a, you know, interim shared path, just to ensure that we're not, you know, forcing cyclists to merge in with traffic, which they may not feel comfortable doing. And also there may not be the width available there to really support that, and they just have to get stuck behind vehicles. So anyway, that's just my notes on temporary traffic management. I wanted to have a quick chat through assignment 2. Thank you for those that have already submitted your assignments. We will be marking those shortly, so don't be too stressed if you haven't got your mark yet. It's just quite a bit of content to get through and quite a bit of grading for us, but rest assured that we'll get into that shortly. Any questions while I get up the assignment from Marissa or Ainsley?
No, none from me, Max.
All good from my end as well, Max.
Excellent. Well, that's good. So for those that have already had a look at assignment 2, you will have noticed or seen this proposed configuration in York Street, and I'm going to focus on the western side of the scope of the works, or the very left. And in particular, I'm going to have a look at the intersection with Wellington Street. So this is right at the edge of the scope or the extents. And I've very conveniently got some little icons here to help me talk through another risk associated with signalized intersections and cyclists. So I'm going to drop our little cyclist here. Yeah, I'll put them back there. So they are in their bicycle lane, as is designated in the legend. I'm also going to just drop a green vehicle. Put this one a little bit closer. And I might do a few copies of this one, actually. case you didn't guess, I used to really love paint as a kid. And I'll drop in this red vehicle as well in the outside lane here. I'm going to put this one a little bit further back. Next up, I'm going to draw some paths, which would indicate where these different users may be traveling. So the cyclist is likely wanting to travel through here and to the other side, like that. Hopefully you can see that. The vehicle that is in the inside lane is actually in a, get rid of these boxes. The vehicle that's in the inside lane is in a left turn traffic lane. So they will no doubt be performing a left turn like that. Pretty bad left turn. The vehicle on the outside lane is in a left and through lane. So theoretically, they could also be performing this movement, left turn. When you've got the inside vehicle turning left adjacent the bicycle lane there, as I talked about before, if we do a protected intersection here, you'd have a greater offset and their ability to see each other would be greatly improved. But in this scenario, it's pretty hard to see each other. It is possible, though, that on approach to this intersection, because they're right next to each other, it's likely that they've already acknowledged that there's a cyclist there, someone turning left, someone's going to need to give way to too. So there is that kind of acknowledgement. Because there's no separation prior, you've already got that history of approaching that intersection together. It's incredibly likely that you'd be aware that there's a cyclist there. That cannot be said for this red vehicle, because it is possible that that inside lane backs up, and so you've just got this line of vehicles that completely blocks sight lines. So that's actually referred to as a dynamic visual obstruction, is the kind of technical jargon. It's dynamic, it's not like a static obstruction, it's not always there, but it's saying that potentially if there's a queue of vehicles in that inside lane, they would actually block the sight lines for that red vehicle and cyclists going through there. So you could have a vehicle turning left in that green, yielding to cyclists, and then the red vehicle, just assume that they're slowing down to perform their left turn movement and just speeding up and doing their left turn without any consideration that there could be cyclists crossing there. So whenever you have multi-turn lanes adjacent a bicycle facility or pedestrians as well, you do run into this risk of dynamic visual obstruction, also referred to as masking. But just another quite a notable concern for cyclists within this space. If you haven't done your Module 2 assignment yet, and you wanted to include that as part of your assignment, please don't, because I really want you to focus on your own learnings and don't want you to just repeat what I've said there. And I also want you to focus on more the mid-block and things like that. So yeah, if you haven't done it yet, you shouldn't be using that as an example. I've got one last example that I wanted to show you, and then I'll just run through the LMS so you're aware of what's required before our next session on Friday. And this one is another example of, what can be done within the space of not being able to provide protected intersection, but, trying to make something a little bit better. This one is in Toowoomba. So shout out to those up in Queensland. And it is, I might go to the intersection first so you can have a bit of a look at what's going on here, because there's quite a bit going on. This is a really, really popular left turn movement for vehicles, okay? However, cyclists tend to head on through. So the dominant movement there for vehicles is left, whereas, oh, sorry, not dominant, but it's very popular for vehicles to turn left, whereas cyclists want to head through. So the way they've managed that to get cyclists away from the curbside is, if I go up to the approach of this, you can see that's where cyclists are riding, and they need to get that across closer to the through lane so that they can get cyclists through that area there. The way that they've managed this or mitigate this is painted this giant conflict box, which is kind of indicating that cyclists can travel diagonally across here to then get into this position here. This is by no means a best practice approach. I'm not suggesting that by any means. I'm just showing, just an example of complex scenarios and different ways these treatments have been managed. But a cyclist would be kind of traveling diagonally across there to then get into that bicycle lane that's closer to the through lane. And the use of this conflict paint is really trying to educate motorists that there's cyclists that are going to be traveling across the bike lane, the lane there. So there is a lot going on there, but yeah, one that I just wanted to share with you as you've just completed your intersections module, and is quite an interesting example. So to finish off for today, we will have, as part of the coursework for today, is a quiz. So for those that haven't already done module 1 quiz, please take your time now to complete that. Module 3 quiz, once again, just goes off that idea of covering content that we've already done. The 360-degree video for intersections will also get you to watch that prior to Friday as well. In this example, actually, I'd recommend, whilst we're talking, or I'm talking in this scenario, just flip around and watch traffic instead of watching me. So you can see how the protected intersection functions. You'll probably get to see some relatively interesting examples of vehicles traveling through here. So we'll get you to watch that before Friday. And yes, that will be it. So the 360-degree video, module 3 quiz, you can smash that out today. And then module 4 for Friday will be on roundabouts. So very excited to present that. And log on a few minutes early for module 4, and we will also be running some trivia. Any questions you'd like me to follow up with there, Marissa?
There is none from me. There is a question in the Q&A, but I think Ainsley's currently answering that one.
Excellent.
Yes, all good. I'll answer the one in the Q&A, and then I think that's all the questions for today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for all the questions, and thank you, Ainsley, for answering them all in the background as well. Good luck with the quiz. Reach out if you have any issues, and look forward to seeing you all on Friday.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. See you.